This is Chemistry Basics, and the first thing I asked of all my students was to define what matter was. Now, most of my students eventually came up with the idea that matter takes up space and has mass. Now remember, there's a difference. Mass is not weight. Mass is independent of gravity. Weight is mass times gravity. So a little difference between mass and weight. Then I gave the students a piece of foil and I simply asked for them to determine a way in which we could determine the thickness of foil. And so students were given time to try to figure out how they would solve the problem. And it comes back to the idea of density is equal to mass times volume. The density of foil is 0.91. We know that. You can measure two of the sides and we can go weigh our foil. And that's how that's solved. Then the next problem that I gave my students was to determine the number of sugar molecules in a sugar cube. This one was more challenging, but again, I'm trying to get you to think about how small of a substance we're working with here. A few things that we know. We do know that sugar contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Once you remember that and can recall your formula for sucrose, we can look up on the periodic table and find out what the masses are. And then we have our volume of our cube. We can do some math and find out how many molecules are. This was a more challenging question because there's a lot of stuff coming together on this. But the main thing was just to get students to think about how small are we talking about? The final problem that I gave my students was a container filled with beads. Now, unlike this picture, the beads that I gave my students was multiple different shapes and sizes, but they're all made of the same type of plastic. This problem was easier for most of my students to figure out what to do because you could actually see it. And that's what we're getting at when it comes to chemistry. We're not going to be able to see the particles. We're not going to be able to see what's going on. So we have to infer what's going on with our observations and with our knowledge that we have from other classes. So students were asked to record their plan, then to include any math that was used on this whole process. Again, just trying to think about what might be there. And then I asked them to also to reflect on their learning process. What was some hard things about the task? What was some easy things? Where were you limited? We did talk about some vocab words. Like one of the terms we talked about was density. And we'll talk about it more. And then just having the kids reflect on what were some things you need to know in order to solve it.